Now, where does one start with Doom? Well, one would start at the beginning when it comes to Doom. And well, I was just starting college when the first Doom game came out. Now, you have to picture it. This was the time of shareware, the time of freeware. And so, basically, I don't know how much was made on the first quote episode. The first episode was the freebie, in a sense, in this essence. And my first exposure was I was on one floor of the dorm, and the guy who had it was actually on, 2 floors down. And my one friend, I think, was rooming with him at the time, where they just knew each other. Well, this is when people were first getting exposed to Doom, and it was phenomenal. Now you have to remember that this was this was early in the years of computers. And the people who made Doom had made a game prior that was a quote first person shooter, but it didn't take off like it did with Doom. And I think part of that was just fighting the monsters of hell. You had all these monsters in it, and you actually didn't get to learn the name of these monsters until you either had a manual or something. And manuals didn't necessarily come through shareware. In fact, a lot of these creatures you didn't find out their real names until probably until Doom 2 came out. But Doom was phenomenal. This was a game that needed an internal hard drive, so if you had a computer that didn't have an internal hard drive, well, you weren't playing Doom. And the computer I had at the time didn't have an internal hard drive. It was all floppy. I only had to run floppy disks. So what happened? Well, in the years that passed, due to how popular Doom was, a first-person shooter killing the demons of hell, and all that, it became popular that the next year Doom 2 came out. And that's a fast development time. And, back then this was easy to pull off a fast development time like that. But we'll talk about Doom 2 later. We're talking Doom now. See, Doom was the birth of a franchise. And not many people can necessarily say, I was there when Doom started. I was one thing. And the game is still relatively popular to this day. I mean, you could find streamers playing it and all that. And I think part of the fun of Doom was how simple it was. It followed a pattern that id Software used with some of its games and was your next step in the 3D shooter genre. Now, its predecessor, which was Wolfenstein, was flat. Everything was the same height. Everything was pretty much, walls were pretty much the same, and it was more grid-like. Doom was beyond that. Things had varying heights. You couldn't have two different areas at the same, two different levels at the same spot because of the design of it. And so you had to, make do. I mean, you had different levels and you could run off something and use that as your difference to, get to a ledge that's higher up than what you can reach. And it used the same type of system for levels. Now, when Doom came out, it initially had 4 difficulty levels. which were basically the same that were in Wolfenstein 3D. You had your easiest, you had an easy, you had a normal, and you had your hard difficulty. And just like Wolfenstein, the first level was what you paid for, and if you wanted the extra levels, you had to send to the company. That's how Shareware worked. And, some people would see this as a bad design concept, but it did work, especially with the really good games. And Doom was beyond good. It was excellent. And so, after the takeoff of Doom 2, they decided to give everybody the chance to play the levels. And I think this had dual purpose at the time because it was the release and that either predated or went along with how Doom got more well known. And in fact, when Doom 2 came out and they released then the Ultimate Doom, which had the first 3 episodes plus a new 4th episode, it also included the new difficulty setting. And that new difficulty setting was Nightmare. And this was hard as hell because enemies would respawn. Drops for items to pick up were fewer and fewer. Enemies were tougher. And this is what led many people to start, delving into challenges and all that. But Doom was also the first game that offered, if I recall right, a deathmatch mode where you could play against other players. This was relatively new in those days because not many people could have a network. It was either dial-up. So the only way to successfully do a match like that was to load the game onto multiple computers in a lab, or get a bunch of bring your computer over to your buddy's house and all hook them up into a network and then just play and fight everybody. And what made it even better is, if you set it up right, you don't see everybody's screen. You can't see anybody else's screen but your own. And this is what made stuff like this popular and started the genre of the deathmatch type game. Now, of course, this grew into more, on more computers, and with the system and the game implementation being well designed, it also started to see popularity going outside the computer mainstream. In fact, when consoles started coming out like the Super Nintendo, which was at the time I went to college growing in popularity, it became the idea to port Doom to these systems. And of course, you had some systems that would have a little bit of difficulty with some of the stuff that's in it. One of which being Nintendo, which had at the time a low tolerance of stuff like blood and that in games. It soon became fact that if they wanted this to be successful, they were going to have to allow it. And, well, if it's monsters, it's not so much. Zombies, well, it's not so much. And the game became more and more popular. And in fact, in the history of computing, when at the time that the new Windows operating system came out, Windows 95, remarkably more computers had Doom installed on them than they did Windows 95, which told you how much and how popular Doom had become. I mean, if it's outperforming a major operating system. And this is what made the game so good. Now, I got into the game like everybody at the time, and I did have my quote shooter phase, and in some ways have gotten a little back to it, but it helped to set the scene for other games to take the first person shooter perspective. I don't think some of the games would have gone that route if they didn't see how good it worked. Maybe it would have taken more time to get popular, but you can't argue how popular the first person perspective was. And it was crossing platforms, getting onto all major systems. Now, of course, some things had to be edited. One such notable was in one level of the game, you had a area that was shaped like a swastika. And of course, since the 1940s, thanks to the Nazis in Germany, the swastika has gained a bad reputation. Now, so much so that when they ported the game to other systems and re-released it as the Ultimate Doom, they actually changed that layout so it didn't look like that. Now, I can understand where they were coming from on this. The game was already steeped in evil imagery, and that you were fighting the legions of hell. And you have to admit that when it was first presented, you don't necessarily think hell because it was in the future on a moon base on Mars. So this was another brilliant story twist to put in there, and that helped sell it. And this made the game so popular and all that it became, really franchise worthy. I think my own limited exposure to Doom at that time led me to pick up the books that were written at the time, which are good reads, I will say that. And the first one, you really get the feeling of going through the game and doing what a lot of players did at the time. I mean, you had the imp, and people, that's called an imp. It looks like a spiny thing to me. Let's call it a spiny. The demon has iconically become known as the Pinky Demon, or Pinky. And there is actually a little nod to that in the Doom movie that had come out in the mid-2000s. Some say it's a train wreck, but, there is such things that they had to put in there, and there were things that kept it from happening for many years. And it has so much greatness in it. I mean, the books paid homage to the fact that we were naming these creatures. A cacodemon in original Doom, well, the players called them pumpkins, or maybe tomatoes or something. Pumpkins were pretty much the common name, I think. The Hell Knights were called, no, the Barons of Hell were called the Bruiser Brothers. The Cyber Demon, well, the Cyber Demon became iconic. That was like the secondary spokes figure of Doom. In fact, the two of the biggest things you can recognize from Doom is Doom Guy and the Cyber Demon. And Doom Guy became an iconic character in and of himself. And according to, I think, official id lore, Doom Guy is the descendant of Commander Keen, another character that id Software came up with. And Keen is the descendant of B.J. Bazowski, or Bazowski, or whatever they named him, from Wolfenstein 3D. So, the game is steeped in history and lore, and the character is so set in the world. And Doom also had an impact on the world. In fact, it was so revolutionary, I think the military was using it as training software for some of their soldiers. And they were designing WADs to help in their training. A practice that got out there with normal people, creating amazing games based off of Doom. I had one at the time that would work with Doom as well as Doom 2, but I'm not going to get to that now. But Doom is monumental. For me, it was a bit of a stress relief in those early days. I'm not the competitive type to really go onto the speed rounds and speed runs that made that a lot of people still do to this day, just to see if they can beat the best time out there. I'm a more casual player. Do I want to find all the secrets? Yeah, I'd love to find all the secrets if I could. I know I can't. Mainly because I'm not that skilled. Not to do it with a speed run, but I do it more casual. I think I've only once played Doom on ultraviolet level, and that was just for an unfair gaming challenge, which you could actually find that video up on the channel somewhere. But Doom, it had an impact on a lot of people. For some, it was stress relief. For some, it's, I'd love to design a game like this. And I think a lot of Doom players later entered the gaming industry in one way or another, maybe designing levels, maybe designing games that are along the first-person shooter aspect, and took part in the evolution of the genre of the first-person shooter. Of course, that's also my own speculation. Anyhow, that's all I have to say on Doom, or the Ultimate Doom. I invite you to subscribe to the channel. I thank you for listening to all this. Give it a like if you'd like. And take a look at some of the other videos that are up on the channel. As always, this is Rich Kale here on YouTube, RichJetX elsewhere. Have a good one.